Hello and welcome to Sign High. I'm Alana Best.
Kia ora, I'm Mita Moses. Last week we talked about court and your rights. Maybe you are wondering why we have those rights in New Zealand Sign Language. We discussed this with the Human Rights Commissioner mediator. She explains the history of New Zealand Sign Language and our rights.
But first, we want to tell you about who funded this program. The program was funded by New Zealand Sign Language Board. It has 10 members which oversee the promotion and maintenance of New Zealand Sign Language. The board is supported by Office for Disability Issues. Now, we have the New Zealand Board's Senior Advisor, Sonia, from Wellington. She will explain about the New Zealand Sign Language Board. Hi, what is your name?
Sonia Pivak is my name, and I'm here in Whangarei to talk about the Sign Language Board. We want to share information about what's been going on with us, and it's a really exciting time for sign language in New Zealand.
So I want to ask, with the Sign Language Board, why was that established? Can you tell us some more information about that?
So it's a really interesting time for the sign language community, and if we have to go way back in history to find out about that, the Human Rights Commission had an inquiry regarding sign language because since the time that the New Zealand Sign Language Act was established, there's been a lot of expectations in terms of access, and that hasn't really met the community's expectations. So through the inquiry, they realised that there was a lot to be done. There was a lot of debate and consultation before the Act became, and so lots of people have been giving their submissions. There were about 300 received from the community, and the Human Rights Commission looked through all of those, and in terms of the information that was received regarding sign language, they had a lot of findings and recommendations, and as a result of that inquiry, the Sign Language Board was established because we've desperately needed it in New Zealand. Since the Māori Language Act was established, there's a Māori Language Commission, and so the point is that similarly a board has been established to follow up on one of those Human Rights Commission recommendations. The Ministry for Social Development has been very keen to set up the board, and there's an advisory group that gets together and had been getting together to talk about sign language. And when the inquiry recommended that the board be established, there was a lot of discussion as to how the board would look, what the membership would be like. And so the Ministry for Social Development put together some terms of reference, and as a result of all the discussions, then the Sign Language Board was established.
So is there anyone who is a member of the government who's on there?
So as I mentioned, the terms of reference, the TOR, has the overview, what the impact of the board, what the expectations are, how many members, etc. The idea is that the promotion of sign language is the main goal. So how we go about advocating for that and encouraging that. Leadership is another aspect of those terms of reference, and we're thinking of people who are very experienced. They've been on advisory groups before. Another aspect is, like you mentioned about the Sign Language Board, they have to be have very good networks with different government departments, and so we have to make sure that those members of the Sign Language Board have that level of experience, because they are going to be making requests of different people in other departments.
Next, Human Rights Commissioner Mediator Cecilia will explain our rights in New Zealand Sign Language.
Hi Cecilia. How are you?
Kia ora, ka nui te ora. I'm fine, thanks.
So can you explain your role here?
I'm a mediator with the Human Rights Commission, and I've been in that particular role for over 20 odd years. Initially starting in the role of complaints officer, when we had the investigative function. We've now moved to mediation when the amendment to the Act came in 2001.
Could you give us a brief history of New Zealand Sign Language and human rights in New Zealand?
I was thinking about this particular question last night, and for some reason I liken it to the experiences of te reo. And I think for Māori and the deaf community, there are some commonalities there around the history behind New Zealand Sign Language, where New Zealand Sign Language, like te reo, was actively prohibited in the classroom. It was considered to be an inferior language, and the deaf community were consequently forced into oral communication.
I've seen the phrase reasonable accommodation in the Human Rights Act. What does that mean for New Zealand Sign Language users?
In simple terms, the word reasonable accommodation means accommodating someone, perhaps like making an adjustment to a work environment, or if you're providing a service to a person, then you provide the relevant accommodation that that particular person requires. There is sections under the Human Rights Act that imposes an obligation on a service provider or an employer to accommodate persons with disabilities, unless it's unreasonable not to do so. Now, part of being what we call unreasonable means this is going to cost too much. What are the logistical factors involved here?
How does the Human Rights Commission accommodate people who use New Zealand Sign Language as their first language?
I have to say we've had to learn over the years how to deal with this. Initially, when disability became an unlawful ground under the Human Rights Act, and we received a number of complaints from a wide range of people with a range of impairments. Admittedly, when we got complaints from the deaf community, that was a whole new learning curve for the staff of the Commission. Basically, we didn't really have systems set up to accommodate that in the first place. We thought we were pretty technologically kind of appropriate when we said, look, we provide a TTY system. Great stuff. As it became apparent that most of the deaf community communicated by tics, and basically that was a primary form of communication, particularly for the younger generation. We found that we weren't hearing from the older generation simply because there were no other means of their communicating their needs to organisations such as the Human Rights Commission. So now we provide information in New Zealand Sign Language on our website. Staff are becoming more aware of how to deal with it, and also encouraging staff to take up sign language as one of our professional development anchors.
What common issues regarding New Zealand Sign Language have the Human Rights Commission been involved with?
The Commission in 2012 to 14 conducted an inquiry on the right to sign. And the focus of that particular inquiry was on working with key government agencies and the deaf community. From that particular inquiry came about 14 recommendations, and they involved agencies like schools, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development, DHBs, and all around the need to access that critical piece of information.
So if a person has a complaint, what should they do?
Well, first of all, I would suggest that they look on our website if they do have access to a computer or internet to begin with, or I find that most of the deaf community are pretty computer savvy or technological savvier than probably most of us. So once you know that there is the appropriate avenue to make a complaint to the Commission, usually it is by email or by an online form from our website. They fill out that form and make an application for a complaint. If a deaf person has difficulty filling that form in, communicate with the Commission via text or by email or the telephone relay system, and then we can set up the telephone relay system in order to take that complaint through that particular process. Once we receive a complaint, the complaint is assessed to see whether or not it falls within the scope of the human rights provisions and whether we are able to progress that complaint through our disputes resolution service.
Wow, so much information. Thank you so much.
Kia ora.
Welcome back. Next we have, from the Sign Language Board, Richard.
Kia ora. My name is Mita. Mita Moses. I'm deaf and I'm Māori. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. I'm Richard Petty. Kia ora, tātou katoa. Thanks for talking to me, Mita. So, I'm a member of the NZSL board. It's newly established, and I've been a part of that board to increase the awareness in terms of access to government departments. With the Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Health, we are leading the charge for people to be involved more with NZSL. We are gathering information. We have 5 priorities that we are working on, and it's really great to be part of. So what I would like to know from you, Mita, is how I can be a role model for Northland Māori.
That's a really good question. I'm part of the Sign Language Advisory Board and have been involved with that board As part of that, we have been researching and finding out that nationally, from the age of 5 to 12, that there are a lot of people who need information. We are finding out more about Māori who are deaf and hearing how we can improve sign language access in the future.
So in terms of the percentage of Māori deaf, are we thinking that it's a high number or a low number?
What we have found out is that there is a high percentage of Māori deaf. So from Northland to Waikato, there are about 80% of 5 to 12-year-olds, 0 to 5-year-olds. On the other hand, if we are thinking about deaf and hearing impaired children, every 3 months we know that there are approximately 100 babies born. We are not too sure how to work with the children who are whāngai with foster families, so that is a big priority.
Oh, it's really important that this kind of information comes to us at the NZSL board, because it's very important for access to interpreting services and trilingual interpreters as well, for those individuals who are able to interpret sign language, te reo Māori and English. We are looking also how Māori deaf can access marae, because without interpreting services that's not always easy. And we really want to get involved with what is going on in the north, find out what Māori deaf family whānau want, and that's a priority for us, especially for those hearing families whānau. We really want to make sure that the access is improved for them. Our role is to advise the government, the Ministry of Health, the Office for Disability Issues and Māori Development. And we're giving them feedback, those three especially, and we've received funding to be able to support anybody in terms of leadership. We want to make sure that the priorities are being met for the community. And we want Māori deaf to be proud of their identity. It's a really important priority for us.
It's a great opportunity for you to be here, and we really want the Māori deaf community to grow in the future, and number one for me is the children, the tamariki, because if they can be involved from a young age to be involved with sign language, that means as an older child and an adult, they will be absolutely fine. I'm sure of it.
For the 0 to 5s, we know that there's a lot of education going on in that time, the development of language, be that English Sign Language or te reo Māori, and getting the access and contact with the deaf community. So for people who are hearing impaired, this includes, or those who have cochlear implants. So hopefully this funding will make that more accessible. So thank you to the state for that.
Kia ora, bro. Thank you very much. More from Sonia and Alana.
And can you see any improvements in terms of the actions that the Sign Language Board will be taking? What will that mean for the deaf community? Will it mean access to language? What kind of issues will you be looking at?
Well, I can't say that we're going to solve everything. That's a little bit on the side of impossible, but we have our priorities. We've got 5 so far, and we are working through those. Sign language education is at the top. Sign language inclusion in the home, because it's exceptionally important that children, if you know that 95% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, so how is their access to language in the home? That's a real priority for us. Again, the government is responsible to make sure that services are accessible. Māori deaf and the link that Māori deaf have to their identity is another priority, because a lot find that they are left out of their own culture. And then the last priority is to make sure that interpreting standards are excellent. We don't want anyone to leave the program thinking that they are not ready to go into assignments, and so what we're wanting is to have standards that follow the international So those 5 priorities are what we have going at the moment. And of course, we are linking those priorities to the government departments. How we will go about those, well, I'm not too sure.
So the 5 priorities then. You said 95% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, and so sign language in the home is really important. The reason I wanted to talk to you today was in terms of the New Zealand Sign Language Fund. What is that about? I know that the funding that we are receiving for this particular project and this particular program comes from you. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, the NZSL fund, it's really exciting because all the people who want to get some kind of project happening in their community, like I mentioned, we have $6 million, and that will be used over a period of 4 years. So that means $1.3 million every single year. So what do we do with that money? $1.25 million is going towards the Sign Language Fund to promote any NZSL projects, and we're going to be able to welcome applications from any organisation who has an initiative that they want to get off the ground. Really, the key thing is that the focus is on sign language. The second round for the applications is coming soon, and we are thinking about the inclusion of sign language in the community is going to be the theme for this next round. So we're asking people to think a lot about how we can go about strengthening the language. What are the different approaches? How can people get a better grasp of sign language? Really, externally, we're thinking about promoting awareness of sign language outside of the deaf community. And internally, we're thinking in terms of the community and those people who are sign language users, how we can strengthen that. The focus for the next funding round, we do want to make sure that inclusion is the key. Perhaps in the third funding round, we might change our focus.
That's really great to hear. With New Zealand Sign Language, it's an official language of New Zealand, and it has been since 2006. So we do need to promote it more, don't we? So this fund will be great for us to access that, and hopefully down the track we will see more people and more projects coming up. Thank you so much for your time today, Sonia, and for having a chat with me about the New Zealand Sign Language Board. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you.
Did you know that you can apply for funding through New Zealand Sign Language Board for a project promoting New Zealand Sign Language?
You have learnt a lot about New Zealand Sign Language today and about the rights of deaf people. I hope that you will consider the benefits of a multilingual workplace, education setting and home when New Zealand Sign Language is used. New Zealand Sign Language and Te Reo are the same, where we need to continue with people speaking it to keep it alive.
Next time, we are going to visit a general practitioner. Thanks for watching us. Kia ora.
Bye.